Ludwig van Beethoven, the musical genius, a journey through his life and legacy. Hello and welcome. Today, we have a real treat for all you classical music enthusiasts out there. We'll be taking a deep dive into the life and legacy of one of history's most renowned composers, Ludwig van Beethoven. So, grab your headphones and join us on this musical journey. Ludwig van Beethoven, a name synonymous with genius, innovation, and timeless music. Born in 1770 in Bonn, Germany, Beethoven's life was a symphony of creativity, struggle, and resilience. Today, we'll explore the man behind the music, his remarkable compositions, and the lasting impact he has had on the world of classical music. Beethoven's life was not always filled with symphonies and concertos. His early years were marked by adversity, with a turbulent family life and his father's ambition to turn him into a child prodigy, much like Mozart. Born into a family of musicians, Beethoven showed prodigious talent from a young age, even though his father's harsh teaching methods left him yearning for freedom. Despite his challenging upbringing, Beethoven's passion for music only grew stronger. By the time he was 17, he moved to Vienna, the musical heart of Europe, to pursue his dreams. In Vienna, Beethoven quickly made a name for himself as a virtuoso pianist and a talented composer. He began to develop his unique style, bridging the classical and romantic eras, leading to the creation of some of the most iconic pieces in the history of classical music. His compositions, like the Moonlight Sonata, the Pathetique Sonata, and his symphonies, including the famous Ninth Symphony, broke new ground in music and left a lasting impact on the genre. One of the most striking aspects of Beethoven's life was his battle with deafness. Around his mid-22s, he began to experience hearing loss, a condition that might have shattered the dreams of most musicians. However, Beethoven's indomitable spirit refused to be silenced. He continued to compose and perform, defying the odds. His late works, like the Late String Quartets and the Missa Solemne, are a testament to his ability to create beauty in the face of adversity. Beethoven's influence on the world of music is immeasurable. His compositions have become the gold standard for symphonic music, and his impact on future composers, such as Brahms, Wagner, and Tchaikovsky, is undeniable. His Ode to Joy from the Ninth Symphony remains an anthem of unity and hope, echoing through the ages. Beethoven's music is not just a collection of notes, it's a profound expression of human emotion and the human spirit. Now we will begin the explanation and narration in more detail. Ludwig van Beethoven was a German composer and pianist. Beethoven remains one of the most admired composers in the history of Western music. His works rank among the most performed of the classical music repertoire and span the transition from the classical period to the Romantic era in classical music. His career has conventionally been divided into early, middle, and late periods. His early period, during which he forged his craft, is typically considered to have lasted until 1802. From 1802 to around 1812, his middle period showed an individual development from the styles of Joseph Haydn and Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, and is sometimes characterized as heroic. During this time, he began to grow increasingly deaf. In his late period, from 1812 to 1827, he extended his innovations in musical form and expression. Beethoven was born in Bonn. His musical talent was obvious at an early age. He was initially harshly and intensively taught by his father, Johann van Beethoven. Beethoven was later taught by the composer and conductor Christian Gottlob Neef, under whose tutelage he published his first work, a set of keyboard variations, in 1783. He found relief from a dysfunctional home life with the family of Helene von Breuning, whose children he loved, befriended, and taught piano. At age 21, he moved to Vienna, which subsequently became his base, and studied composition with Haydn. Beethoven then gained a reputation as a virtuoso pianist, and was soon patronized by Karl Auer, Prince Lichnowsky for compositions, which resulted in his 3 Opus 1 piano trios in 1795. His first major orchestral work, the First Symphony, premiered in 1800, and his first set of string quartets was published in 1801. Despite his hearing deteriorating during this period, he continued to conduct, premiering his Third and Fifth Symphonies in 1804 and 1808, respectively. His violin concerto appeared in 1806. His last piano concerto, dedicated to his frequent patron Archduke Rudolph of Austria, premiered in 1811, without Beethoven as soloist. He was almost completely deaf by 1814, and he then gave up performing and appearing in public. He described his problems with health and his unfulfilled personal life in 2 letters, his Heiligenstadt Testament to his brothers and his unsent love letter to an unknown immortal beloved. After 1810, increasingly less socially involved, Beethoven composed many of his most admired works, including later symphony, mature chamber music, and the late piano sonatas. His only opera, Fidelio, first performed in 1805, was revised to its final version in 1814. He composed Missa Solemnis between 1819 and 1823 and his final symphony, No. 9, one of the first examples of a choral symphony, between 1822 and 1824. Written in his last years, his late string quartets, including the Grosse Fuge of 1,825,182 are among his final achievements. After several months of illness, which left him bedridden, he died in 1827. Beethoven was the grandson of Ludwig van Beethoven, a musician from the town of Mechelen in the Austrian Duchy of Brabant in what is now the Flemish region of Belgium, who moved to Bonn at the age of 21. Ludwig was employed as a bass singer at the court of Clemens August, Archbishop-Elector of Cologne, eventually rising to become, in 1761, Kapellmeister and hence a preeminent musician in Bonn. The portrait he commissioned of himself toward the end of his life remained displayed in his grandson's rooms as a talisman of his musical heritage. Ludwig had 2 sons, the younger of whom, Johann, worked as a tenor in the same musical establishment and gave keyboard and violin lessons to supplement his income. Johann married Maria Magdalena Keverich in 1767. She was the daughter of Heinrich Keverich 170175, who was head chef at the court of Johann X. Philipp von Walderdorf, Archbishop of Trier. Beethoven was born of this marriage in Bonn, at what is now the Beethoven House Museum, Baumgasse 20. There is no authentic record of the date of his birth, but the registry of his baptism, in the Catholic parish of St. Remigius on the 17th of December 1770, survives, and the custom in the region at the time was to carry out baptism within 24 hours of birth. There is a consensus that his birth date was the 16th of December, but no documentary proof of this. Of the 7 children born to Johann van Beethoven, only Ludwig, the second born, and 2 younger brothers survived infancy. Caspar Anton Karl was born on the 8th of April 1774, and Nikolaus Johann, who was generally known as Johann, the youngest, was born on the 2nd of October 1776. Beethoven's first music teacher was his father. He later had other local teachers, including the court organist Gilles van den Etten, Tobias Friedrich Pfeffer, a family friend, who provided keyboard tuition, Franz Raventini, a relative who instructed him in playing the violin and viola, and court concertmaster Franz Anton Reis, who instructed Beethoven on the violin. His tuition began in his 5th year. The regime was harsh and intensive, often reducing him to tears. With the involvement of Pfeffer, who was an insomniac, there were irregular late-night sessions with the young Beethoven dragged from his bed to the keyboard. Beethoven's musical talent became obvious at a young age. Aware of Leopold Mozart's successes in this area with his son Wolfgang and daughter Nannerl, Johann attempted to promote his son as a child prodigy, claiming that Beethoven was 6 on the posters for his first public performance in March 1778. In 1780 or 1781, Beethoven began his studies with his most important teacher in Bonn, Christian Gottlob Neff. Neff taught him composition. In March 1783, Beethoven's first published work appeared, a set of keyboard variations. Beethoven soon began working with Neff as assistant organist, at first unpaid 1782, and then as a paid employee 1784 of the court chapel. His first 3 piano sonatas, Wu 47, sometimes known as Kurfürst for their dedication to Elector Maximilian Friedrich, were published in 1783. In the same year, the first printed reference to Beethoven appeared in the Magazin der Musik, Louis van Beethoven, a boy of 11 years and most promising talent. He plays the piano very skillfully, and with power, reads at sight very well. The chief piece he plays is Das Wohltemperierte Klavier of Sebastian Bach, which Herr Neff puts into his hands. Maximilian Friedrich's successor as Elector of Bonn was Maximilian Franz. He gave some support to Beethoven, appointing him court organist and paying towards his visit to Vienna of 1792. He was introduced in these years to several people who became important in his life. He often visited the cultivated von Breuning family, at whose home he taught piano to some of the children, and where the widowed Frau von Breuning offered him a motherly friendship. There he also met Franz Wegeler, a young medical student, who became a lifelong friend. The von Breuning family environment offered an alternative to his home life, which was increasingly dominated by his father's decline. Another frequenter of the von Breunings was Count Ferdinand von Waldstein, who became a friend and financial supporter during Beethoven's Bonn period. In 1791, Waldstein commissioned Beethoven's first work for the stage, the ballet Musik zu einem Ritterballett. The period of 1785 to 1790 includes virtually no record of Beethoven's activity as a composer. This may be attributed to the varied response his initial publications attracted, and also to ongoing issues in his family. While passing through Augsburg, he visited with composer Anna von Schaden and her husband, who loaned him money to visit his ailing mother in Bonn. His mother died in 1787, shortly after Beethoven's first visit to Vienna, where he stayed for about 2 weeks and almost certainly met Mozart. In 1789, Beethoven's father was forcibly retired from the service of the court, and it was ordered that half of his father's pension be paid directly to Ludwig for support of the family. He contributed further to the family's income by teaching, to which Wedgler said he had an extraordinary aversion, and by playing viola in the court orchestra. This familiarized him with a variety of operas, including works by Mozart, Gluck, and Paisiello. There he also befriended Anton Reicha, a composer, flutist, and violinist of about his own age, who was a nephew of the court orchestra's conductor, Joseph Reicha. From 1790 to 1792, Beethoven composed several works showing a growing range and maturity. Musicologists have identified a theme similar to those of his Third Symphony in a set of variations written in 1791. It was perhaps on Niepce's recommendation that Beethoven received his first commissions. The Literary Society in Bonn commissioned a cantata to mark the occasion of the death in 1790 of Joseph II Wu 87, and a further cantata to celebrate the subsequent accession of Leopold II as Holy Roman Emperor Wu 88 may have been commissioned by the Elector. These two emperor cantatas were not performed at the time and remain lost until the 1880s, when Johannes Brahms called them Beethoven through and as such prophetic of the style that marked his music as distinct from the classical tradition. Beethoven was probably first introduced to Joseph Haydn in late 1790 when Haydn was traveling to London and stopped in Bonn around Christmas. In July 1792, they met in Bonn on Haydn's return trip from London to Vienna, when Beethoven played in the orchestra at the Redoubt in Godesberg. Arrangements were likely made at that time for Beethoven to study with Haydn. Waldstein wrote to him before his departure, "You are going to Vienna in fulfillment of your long-frustrated wishes. With the help of assiduous labor you shall receive Mozart's spirit from Haydn's hands." Beethoven left Bonn for Vienna in November 1792 amid rumors of war spilling out of France. Shortly after departing, Beethoven learned that his father had died. Over the next few years, he responded to the widespread feeling that he was a successor to the recently deceased Mozart by studying Mozart's work and writing works with a distinctly Mozartian flavor. Beethoven did not immediately set out to establish himself as a composer, but rather devoted himself to study and performance. Working under Haydn's direction, he sought to master counterpoint. He also studied violin under Ignaz Schuppanzig. Early in this period, he also began receiving occasional instruction from Antonio Salieri, primarily in Italian vocal composition style. This relationship persisted until at least 1802, and possibly as late as 1809. With Haydn's departure for England in 1794, Beethoven was expected by the Elector to return home to Bonn. He chose instead to remain in Vienna, continuing his instruction in counterpoint with Johann Albrechtsberger and other teachers. In any case, by this time it must have seemed clear to his employer that Bonn would fall to the French, as it did in October 1794, effectively leaving Beethoven without a stipend or the necessity to return. But several Viennese noblemen had already recognized his ability and offered him financial support, among them Prince Joseph Franz Lobkowitz, Prince Karl Lichnowsky, and Baron Gottfried van Swieten. Assisted by his connections with Haydn and Waldstein, Beethoven began to develop a reputation as a performer and improviser in the salons of the Viennese nobility. His friend Nikolaus Simrock began publishing his compositions, starting with a set of keyboard variations on a theme of Ditterstor. By 1793, he had established a reputation in Vienna as a piano virtuoso, but he apparently withheld works from publication so that their eventual appearance would have greater impact. In 1795, Beethoven made his public debut in Vienna over 3 days, beginning with a performance of one of his own piano concertos on the 29th of March at the Burgtheater, and ending with a Mozart concerto on the 31st of March, probably the D minor concerto, for which he had written a cadenza soon after his arrival in Vienna. By this year he had 2 piano concertos available for performance, one in B-flat major he had begun composing before moving to Vienna, and had worked on for over a decade, and one in C major composed for the most part during 1795. Viewing the latter as the more substantive work, he chose to designate it his first piano concerto, publishing it in March 1801 as Opus 15, before publishing the former as Opus 19 the following December. He wrote new cadenzas for both in 1809. Shortly after his public debut, he arranged for the publication of the first of his compositions, to which he assigned an opus number, the 3 piano trios, Opus 1. These works were dedicated to his patron Prince Lichnowsky and were a financial success. Beethoven's profits were nearly sufficient to cover his living expenses for a year. In 1799, Beethoven participated and won a notorious piano duel at the home of Baron Raimund Wetzlar, a former patron of Mozart, against the virtuoso Joseph Wolff. And the next year he similarly triumphed against Daniel Stabelt at the salon of Count Moritz von Fries. With premieres of his first and second symphonies in 1800 and 1803, he became regarded as one of the most important of a generation of young composers following Haydn and Mozart. But his melodies, musical development, use of modulation and texture, and characterization of emotion all set him apart from his influence and heightened the impact some of his early works made when they were first published. For the premiere of his first symphony, he hired the Burgtheater on the 2nd of April 1800 and staged an extensive program, including works by Haydn and Mozart, as well as his septet, the symphony, and one of his piano concertos. The concert, which the Allgemeine Musikalische Zeitung called the most interesting concert in a long time, was not without difficulties. Among the criticisms was that the players did not bother to pay any attention to the soloist. By the end of 1800, Beethoven and his music were already much in demand from patrons and publishers. In May 1799, he taught piano to the daughters of Hungarian Countess Anna Brunswick. During this time, he fell in love with the younger daughter, Josephine. Among his other students, from 1801 to 1805, he tutored Ferdinand Ries, who went on to become a composer and later wrote about their encounters. The young Karl Czerny, who later became a renowned music teacher himself, studied with Beethoven from 1801 to 1803. In late 1801, he met a young countess, Julie Guixardi, through the Brunswick family. He mentions his love for Julie in a November 1801 letter to a friend, but class difference prevented any consideration of pursuing it. He dedicated his 1802 Sonata Opus 27 No. 2, now commonly known as the Moonlight Sonata, to her. In the spring of 1801 he completed The Creatures of Prometheus, a ballet. The work received numerous performances in 1801 and 1802, and he rushed to publish a piano arrangement to capitalize on its early popularity. In the spring of 1802 he completed the Second Symphony, intended for performance at a concert that was cancelled. The symphony received its premiere instead at a subscription concert in April 1803 at the theater in Der Wien, where he had been appointed composer in residence. In addition to the Second Symphony, the concert also featured the First Symphony, the Third Piano Concerto, and the oratorio Christ on the Mount of Olives. Reviews were mixed, but the concert was a financial success. He was able to charge 3 times the cost of a typical concert ticket. His business dealings with publishers also began to improve in 1802 when his brother Caspar, who had previously assisted him casually, began to assume a larger role in managing his affairs. In addition to negotiating higher prices for recently composed works, Caspar also began selling some of his earlier unpublished compositions, and encouraged him against Beethoven's preference to make arrangements and transcriptions of his more popular works for other instrument combinations. Beethoven acceded to these requests, as he could not prevent publishers from hiring others to do similar arrangements of his works. Beethoven told the English pianist Charles Neate in 1815 that he dated his hearing loss from a fit in 1798 induced by a quarrel with a singer. During its gradual decline, his hearing was further impeded by a severe form of tinnitus. As early as 1801, he wrote to Wegeler and another friend, Karl Amenda, describing his symptoms and the difficulties they caused in both professional and social settings, although it is likely some of his close friends were already aware of the issues. The cause was probably autosclerosis, possibly accompanied by degeneration of the auditory nerve. On his doctor's advice, Beethoven moved to the small Austrian town of Heiligenstadt, just outside Vienna, from April to October 1802 in an attempt to come to terms with his condition. There he wrote the document now known as the Heiligenstadt Testament, a letter to his brothers that records his thoughts of suicide due to his growing deafness, and his resolution to continue living for and through his art. The letter was never sent and was discovered in his papers after his death. The letters to Wegeler and Amenda were not so despairing. In them Beethoven commented also on his ongoing professional and financial success at this period, and his determination, as he expressed it to Wegeler, to seize fate by the throat. It shall certainly not crush me completely. In 1806, Beethoven noted on one of his musical sketches, "Let your deafness no longer be a secret, even in art." Beethoven's hearing loss did not prevent him from composing music, but it made playing at concerts, an important source of income at this phase of his life, increasingly difficult. It also contributed substantially to his social withdrawal. Czerny remarked that Beethoven could still hear speech and music normally until 1812. Beethoven never became totally deaf. In his final years he was still able to distinguish low tones and sudden loud sounds. Beethoven's return to Vienna from Heiligenstadt was marked by a change in musical style, and is now often designated as the start of his middle or heroic period, characterized by many original works composed on a grand scale. According to Czerny, Beethoven said, "I am not satisfied with the work I have done so far. From now on I intend to take a new way." The Rasumovsky string quartets and the Waldstein and Appassionata piano sonatas share the Third Symphony's heroic spirit. Other works of this period include the Fourth through Eighth Symphony, the Oratorio Christ on the Mount of Olives, the opera Fidelio, and the violin concerto. Beethoven was hailed in 1810 by the writer and composer T. Hoffmann in an influential review in the Allgemeine Musikalische Zeitung as the greatest of what he considered the three Romantic composers, that is, ahead of Haydn and Mozart. In Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, his music, wrote Hoffmann, sets in motion terror, fear, horror, pain, and awakens the infinite yearning that is the essence of Romanticism. During this time, Beethoven's income came from publishing his works, from performances of them, and from his patrons, for whom he gave private performances and copies of works they commissioned for an exclusive period before their publication. Some of his early patrons, including Lobkowitz and Lichnowsky, gave him annual stipends in addition to commissioning works and purchasing published works. Perhaps his most important aristocratic patron was Archduke Rudolph of Austria, the youngest son of Emperor Leopold II, who in 1803 or 1804 began to study piano and composition with him. They became friends, and their meetings continued until 1824. His position at the theater in Der Wien was terminated when the theater changed management in early 1804, and he was forced to move temporarily to the suburbs of Vienna with his friend Stefan von Breuning. This slowed work on Leonore, his original title for his opera, his largest work to date, for a time. It was delayed again by the Austrian censor and finally premiered, under its present title of Fidelio, in November 1805 to houses that were nearly empty because of the French occupation of the city. In addition to being a financial failure, this version of Fidelio was also a critical failure, and Beethoven began revising it. Despite this failure, Beethoven continued to attract recognition. In 1807, the musician and publisher Muzio Clementi secured the rights to publish his works in England, and Haydn's former patron Prince Esterhazy commissioned the Mass in C, Opus 86, for his wife's name day. But he could not count on such recognition alone. A colossal benefit concert he organized in December 1808, widely advertised, included the premieres of the Fifth and Sixth Symphony, the Fourth Piano Concerto, extracts from the Mass in C, the Scena and Aria A. In the autumn of 1808, after having been rejected for a position at the Royal Theatre, Beethoven received an offer from Napoleon's brother Jerome Bonaparte, then King of Westphalia, for a well-paid position as Kapellmeister at the court and castle. To persuade him to stay in Vienna, Archduke Rudolph, Prince Kinsky, and Prince Lobkowitz, after receiving representations from Beethoven's friends, pledged to pay him a pension of 4,000 florins a year. In the event, Rudolph paid his share of the pension on the agreed date. Kinsky, immediately called to military duty, did not contribute and died in November 1812 after falling from his horse. The Austrian currency destabilized and Lobkowitz went bankrupt in 1811, so that to benefit from the agreement Beethoven eventually had recourse to the law, which in 1815 brought him some recompense. The imminence of war reaching Vienna itself was felt in early 1809. In April, Beethoven completed writing his Piano Concerto No. 5. During the French bombardment of Vienna in May, Beethoven took refuge in the cellar of his brother Kaspar's house. At the end of 1809, Beethoven was commissioned to write incidental music for Goethe's play Egmont. In the spring of 1811, Beethoven became seriously ill, with headaches and high fever. His doctor Johann Malfatti recommended he take a cure at the spa of Teplitz. Advised again to visit Teplitz in 1812, he met there with Goethe, who wrote, "His talent amazed me. Unfortunately, he is an utterly untamed personality, who is not altogether wrong in holding the world to be detestable, but surely does not make it any more enjoyable." In the end, Beethoven's life is a testament to the power of art and the resilience of the human spirit. His music continues to inspire and move generations, proving that genius knows no boundaries, and that the beauty of Beethoven's compositions will forever resonate in the hearts and minds of people all over the world. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the life of Beethoven. Stay tuned for more incredible stories, and remember, it's never too late to make a positive impact on the world. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep exploring the world's incredible stories. I stop at this point today. Thank you for watching. I hope I added something to you.